Hello, Hot Mess historians. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my personal heroes, Miss Rosie the Riveter, and really a bunch of really badass women from World War II. So Rosie the Riveter is a propaganda tool, really is all she is. She is a fictional character created based on actual women, and that's plural, so there is no real Rosie out there. The outbreak of World War II, there was a huge gap left in the workforce in the defense industry, and that's because all of the men were shipping off to go and serve and fight in combat, and no one was left to work in the factories and the munition shops and things like that. So Rosie the Riveter was sort of created as an icon and a propaganda tool to recruit women into that workforce. And that marketing tool worked very well. Right around 5 million women served in the defense industry and in the commercial sector during the Second World War. Now, the Second World War opened up a huge job market for women that had previously been closed. Traditionally, women stayed home, did the child rearing, building the home, and were just left there while the men went off to earn the bacon. Now, the largest influx in this newly opened opportunity was in the aviation industry. Before the Second World War, female positions in the aviation industry were about 1%. And in 1943, women made up 65% of that workforce. So females were stepping up to the plate. They were doing their part. Rosie the Riveter became one of the most iconic images used as a recruitment tool, and probably one of the most iconic images to come out of World War II. I know that there are several other ones. This one, to me, just sings World War II. I'm kind of obsessed with her. I mean, just a little. This iconic image was created by a Pittsburgh artist named J. Howard Miller. And this image was originally featured on a poster for the Westinghouse Electric Corporation. And it had the famous headline, "We Can Do It." The more popularized image of Rosie came from Norman Rockwell. And that portrayed Rosie standing in front of a flag while stomping on a copy of Adolf Hitler's published book, Mein Kampf. That's major symbolism. I love that image. Classic. Rosie's name was solidified in a song that was produced by Red Evans and John Jacob Loeb in 1943. Give it a quick search. I'm going to put a link also to that song. It's actually kind of catchy. But again, obsessed. Now, there are several different claims of women who are saying, "I'm Rosie, I'm the real Rosie, I'm the real Rosie," but she was never created after one specific person, more of a culmination of the working females during this time period in the shops doing that rough, manly work that had previously been closed to them. And while there's no definitive one Rosie, there are several women who performed these jobs and identify as Rosie, and that's fine. I'm all for it. I mean, she's a badass. I want to be a badass. You be a badass too. So the Rosies in the workforce were not the only women participating. It wasn't just at home or stateside in the factories and helping with munitions and equipment. There were more opportunities for women coming about in the armed forces. Before this, women could not officially serve in the military. Yes, they served as nurses and things like that, but they weren't officially a part of any of those armed forces branches. In May 1942, Congress instituted the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, which was later changed to the Women's Army Corps, and these women had full military status. The Women's Army Corps, known as WACS, actually held more than 200 non-combatant jobs, both stateside and overseas in every theater of war. The Navy had the Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Services, or the WAVES, and they held the same military status as naval reservists. The Coast Guard and the Marine Corps also had their versions of the women's groups, but they had smaller numbers of members. Some of the most courageous women we're about to talk about, called the WASPs, and that's Women's Air Force Service Pilots. And these were women who had already gotten their pilot's license in the civilian sector prior to enlisting and became the first women to fly American military aircraft. Pioneers. Just amazing. These women would accumulate over 60 million miles in flight distances. And doing this freed up thousands of male U.S. pilots that could fly into combat zones. More than 1,000 WASPs served, and 38 of those women gave their lives in service during the Second World War. Now, because they were considered civil employees, they were not officially military status. They were not afforded military honors with their passing. But in 1977, the WASPs actually received their full military benefits. So this desperate call for women to serve during the Second World War in these capacities was intended to strictly be a temporary measure, with the expectation that they would step in, take over while the men were overseas. When the war was won, the men would come home, the women would go home. And overall, that's primarily what happened. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of women that stayed, and those that did stay continued to earn about 50% less than the men, and typically received demotions from their current position in favor of the men that were coming home. So while they decided to stay and continue with their service, even though wartime was over, they were bumped down from where they had previously been. And the impact of World War II on the female workforce was permanent. While this was used as a temporary measure, the workforce in America would never be the same. Women got the taste of that, I don't want to say independence per se, but they got that sense of being able to go to work, and with it being socially acceptable during that time, and they wanted to continue that. From that point forward, the female workforce has never been the same. Now I want to talk about one of the OG Rosies, okay, a Miss May Cryer. From 1943 to 1945 in Seattle, Washington, May Cryer worked at Boeing Aircraft. In March 2019, she went to Congress and was advocating to have March 21st recognized as Rosie the Riveter Day of Remembrance. Her goal in making this Rosie the Riveter Day of Remembrance is to inspire the we can do it attitude in young girls everywhere. And I know that I have carried it with me personally for years. I won't even say mild obsession. I have an intense obsession and love for this iconic figure. Won't even say woman specifically. The we can do it attitude is incredibly inspiring. And the sacrifice that these women gave to step into that role, knowing full well that it was not going to be permanent. They were doing their part, no questions asked, is incredible. And I aspire to be a Rosie the Riveter. I aspire to be one of these badass women, because we can do it.